HR metrics are essential when it comes to HR reporting. Your HR report is usually a collection of different metrics divided onto different groups. In this lesson we'll take a much closer look at HR metrics. Let's get started.
Welcome to this lesson on how to create HR metrics. In this course we've spoken a lot about analytics. And analytics uses metrics to explain what's happening in HR. For example, if you want to predict turnover, you take the turnover metric, for example, unwanted turnover last year, and you combine it with, for example, your engagement number, your engagement metric, with travel distance, which is yet another HR metric, and many other metrics. You put them in a model, and that's in the end how you do your analysis. Now, before we start talking about which metrics you should choose to keep track of, I want to take one step back and ask the question that Lyndon also asked. Why do we use metrics? We use metrics to measure performance. Next question is, what is performance? Performance is how well a person does a piece of work or an activity. So we use metrics to measure how well a person or a machine or a robot does a piece of work or activity. In an organization there's a lot of performance going on. A lot of people do a lot of activities. Now, what kind of performance should we measure in HR? Because I've seen organizations keeping track of 100, 200, even more metrics without really knowing which ones are important, which ones they should focus on. So the next question is, what kind of performance should we measure? And this is where the HR value chain comes in. You have different kinds of metrics. On the left side you have efficiency metrics. In the middle you have effectiveness metrics. And on the right you have impact metrics. Now, the efficiency metrics are all HR activities and HR processes which are not HR outcomes. So a lot of your recruitment metrics fall into the efficiency metrics category. Your HR outcomes are the tangible outcomes that you try to achieve within HR, like employee engagement, retention, low absenteeism, competency levels, etc. Now, in the end, you want to leverage your HR outcomes to increase the impact metrics, to increase the organizational objectives. These are profit, market value, market share, productivity, quality, customer satisfaction, etc. What are important metrics? What do we need to achieve as an organization? Which HR outcomes are linked to these organizational objectives? And which HR activities can we then leverage in order to create those HR outcomes, which in turn are linked to the organizational objectives? So you turn the model from right to left. You start with the organizational objectives, with the strategic goals of the company. You look, hey, how can we as HR contribute to those business outcomes? And then which activities and which HR processes can we streamline in order to reach those targets? Now, traditionally, the efficiency metrics have been part of the HR scorecard. So the HR scorecard says something about how efficient HR is doing in its internal processes. The HR outcomes have always been part of the workforce scorecard. How is the workforce in general doing, performing? Absenteeism, is it low? Turnover, is it also low? But turnover for people that we don't want to stay, is that high? So that's a workforce scorecard. And then finally, the business outcomes have been part of the business balanced scorecard. Now, in all organizations, there's a version of a business balanced scorecard. There's a document that says, hey, as an organization, we want to achieve these objectives. And in a lot of organizations, these objectives are well communicated to managers, to line management, etc., and to senior management. Now, the big question is there a workforce scorecard in your organization, and is there an HR scorecard in your organization? If not, start making them. And your metrics are part of sometimes the workforce scorecard and sometimes the HR scorecard, depending on your metrics. Now, metrics are a measurement of any business activity. A metric in that sense differs from a KPI. Metrics, I don't think it's that interesting to dive into how do we create metrics, because everything you can measure in an organization can technically be a metric. But KPIs are much more interesting to keep track of. KPI stands for Key Performance Indicator. As we already saw, a metric is a performance indicator, basically any performance indicator, any way of measuring performance. This means that KPIs are metrics that are key, that are strategically aligned with the business. So KPIs always have a strategic impact. And KPIs have scores, how well are you doing on a KPI, and KPIs have targets, how well do you want to do or do you strive to do on a KPI. So this means that KPIs should be specific, measurable, attainable, result-driven and time-bound. So smart. As I said, we can talk a long time about different metrics, but that's not really interesting. I'll link to a few articles on metrics in the description. What's more interesting is KPIs and leveraging KPIs to do goal setting. What I'll do is I'll link to yet another article in the description, which is really about KPIs and how you can deploy KPIs in a strategic way. Let me give you a quick example on this, and then in the reading material you can continue reading about this. Say in your organization you're trying to reduce turnover because this is leading to a lot of financial problems in your organization. The HR contribution is then retaining employees. How do you do this? The critical success factors are we want to retain our high potentials and we need to let go of the low performers and low potentials. Now, how do you create a metric on this? For retaining your high potentials, I would say attrition in the high potential group as a percentage is a very specific indicator on how to measure this. So your KPI would be attrition in the high potential group over a certain time period. Now, the critical success factors of letting people who don't perform well go would be attrition in the low performers, low potential group in a certain time period, of course. Per KPI, and in this case a KPI is also a metric, you have a certain score. So attrition in the high potential group for this organization is at 18%. But you don't want it to be at 18% because 18% is quite high. You also have a norm, or what you can call a target. And the target would be below 5%. So as you can see now, you have a very specific way of measuring your success factor. You want to retain your high potentials. You measure it by attrition in the high potential group over a certain time period. Your score at the moment is 18%. You're doing horrible, but you want to go to the target or to the norm of below 5%. And it's the same for the attrition in the low performance group. The score at the moment is 6%. You're very well at keeping your low performers in, but you're really bad at keeping your high potentials in. And you want to increase that score to 25%. You don't want to retain the low performers. Now say you have another strategic objective in the firm, which is to maximize customer satisfaction by delivering the service that the customer requires in time, in the right place, on demand. Now this means that your HR contribution on, in this case, employability requires a diverse and flexible group of employees that you can deploy quickly in order to reach those business goals. Question is, how would you measure this? And there are multiple ways to measure this. For example, we are able to quickly assemble teams with the required skill set. And in this case, it usually takes 43 days, but you want it to go back to 30 days. Within a month, you want to deploy a team at a customer so they can solve the customer's problem. As I already said in the support article, you'll read a lot more examples and see, hey, what are the strategic goals in my organization? How can I create a number of strategic goals within HR and align them and then measure them in order to measure success and to also steer for success, to increase the chance of high performance within HR. A final warning, in metrics and especially in KPIs, be cautious of simplicity. Annual turnover doesn't tell you much. What does tell you much is the percentage of regretted loss, or the percentage of unregretted loss. And the same, for example, for time to fill. Time to fill doesn't tell you much. For some functions, a time to fill of 30 or 35 days is quite long, for example, for a secretary. For other functions, for example, a developer, a Java developer, that's quite a short time because those people are really hard to find. So time to fill doesn't tell you much. It only tells you something when you know the kind of position that you're trying to fill. And just focusing on efficiency metrics, remember the HR value chain, the left field. If you only want to focus on time to fill should be the lowest possible number. That's also not a good approach. It's very easy to hire the first random stranger, but you really want to hire future high performers. And you have different metrics that keep track of this. For example, your quality of hire, which measures who did you hire and how are they performing a year later or half a year later. I would rather have a high quality of hire and a longer time to fill than a shorter time to fill and a low quality of hire. So metrics, it may look simple, they're far from simple. Take them case by case and only try to focus on the key metrics that really matter, the key performance indicators.